Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today. The webinar, as it is titled, is Decoding the...
Sir, carry on.
The webinar, as titled, is on Decoding G20 Consensus on Critical Minerals. I hope you find the deliberations and the insights helpful. At the outset, I want to thank Secretary, Ministry of Mines, Shri V.L. Kantarao, and Dr. Veena Kumari D., Joint Secretary, Ministry of Mines, for sparing their valuable time to join the webinar. Welcome, sir. Welcome, ma'am. I have a short context-setting presentation to share. Which will be followed by a special address by our CEEW CEO, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, and then the keynote address by Secretary Mines. We'll start the presentation. I hope the presentation is visible to everyone. The Council on Energy, Environment and Water is one of Asia's leading not-for-profit policy research institutions. The Council uses data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. To do so, we focus on transformations like low-carbon economy, energy transitions, power markets, industrial sustainability, and sustainable livelihoods to improve quality of life through clean air, sustainable water, sustainable food systems, sustainable cooling, and sustainable mobility. By using enablers like finance, technology, circularity, climate resilience, and international cooperation. CEEW is a team of 250 plus multidisciplinary staff. And in the past, we have worked on hundreds of publications in our 13 years of existence and have informed the policymaking process at the subnational, national, and international level. We have been engaging over 20 plus states across the country and have been a strategic or knowledge partner to over 11 ministries for India's G20 presidency. All of you would remember the periodic table from the school days. A mineral typically has various elements which are unique characteristics. The quality of mineral is determined based on the composition of various elements. Some of these minerals are geographically concentrated or are limited in supply, but they are very important uses in low carbon technologies. In simple terms, we call these minerals critical minerals. The table shows some of these minerals and their applications in many clean energy technologies. However, what is interesting to note is that 55% of each of these key minerals that are required for energy transition are only in 15 countries. Many of these minerals like cobalt, lithium, manganese, the concentration is even starker. The mineral production is even more concentrated. So it's not just the reserves, but the mineral production too. Through this chart, we want to showcase that the demand for mineral for the low carbon technologies is expected to increase significantly in the coming years. For many minerals, the production is increasing at a faster pace than the new finds. While there is no correct metric, it is always better to have lower production to reserves ratio. So this was just a short context, but I'll also then quickly go through what was discussed in the G20. The critical minerals deliberations in 2021 and 2022 discussed critical minerals. So you have the Rome's Leaders Declaration, the Joint Energy Climate Ministerial Communique in 2021, followed by the Leaders Declaration in Bali, and of course the Energy Transitions Ministers meeting in Bali. However, under India's presidency, the critical minerals took center stage and there were significant deliberations on the particular topic. The Energy Transition Working Group is where many of these discussions happened. The first meeting happened in February, followed by a second meeting in April, third in May, and finally in July. There were many intersectional meetings that took place between these formal negotiating process. The final Energy Transition Ministerial meeting took place in Goa, where the outcome document was released. I'll just go through quickly the snippets that were discussed. The Energy Transition Ministers meeting acknowledged that there are certain minerals, materials, and technology critical for energy transition, and there is a need to maintain reliable, responsible, and sustainable supply chains of such critical minerals and materials. The group also agreed for voluntary and mutually agreed technology diffusion, skill development, beneficiation at source, and increased flow of finance to address the lack of capital, human, or technical resources. It also agreed for research and development for increasing efficiencies, increasing scale of beneficiation at source, and promoting circularity. Finally, in the leaders' declaration, the same was reiterated, where it was mentioned that critical minerals and materials need to be, the sector needs to have reliable, diversified, sustainable, and responsible supply chains. In addition to these, what was also important to note was that through successful negotiations, the government of India was also able to present its blueprint on building consensus on the critical minerals at the world stage, and a voluntary document on collaboration was shared. So it had 4 principles which are highlighted here. All of these documents are, of course, available on the G20 website, and it can, of course, be accessed for better detail. I'm sure the panelists and the keynote addresses will talk about these in further detail. I now hand it over to to Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, for his special address. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishabh. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, may I also extend my warm greetings to Shri V.L. Kantharao and Dr. Veena Kumari D, Secretary of the Ministry of Mines, and Dr. Veena Kumari D. Thank you so much, Joint Secretary in Ministry of Mines. Thank you so much for your partnership for this very important conversation. We have been engaging for several months with the Ministry of Mines on this critical issue. And as my colleague Rishabh Jain has just presented, India's G20 leadership under its presidency has demonstrated not just why minerals are critical for the energy transition, but also what kind of architecture we might need and the principles and the rules that we might need in order to make sure that we have a reliable supply chain of critical minerals. In the pursuit of clean energy, we face significant challenges in strengthening the supply chain. These minerals are the building blocks for renewable energy technologies, including electric vehicles, solar and wind, power plants, and more. Currently, we are reliant on imports for many of these minerals. According to a recent CEEW report, only 15 countries possess 55% of 7 critical minerals such as cobalt, copper, graphite, lithium, manganese, nickel, and rare earth elements. The G20 recognized the significance of these critical minerals. The imperative to reinforce the supply chain of these essential resources was briefly touched upon, as Rishabh presented, in previous G20 deliberations as well, in Rome in 2021 and the G20 summit in Bali in 2022. However, it was during the Energy Transition Working Group meetings under India's G20 presidency that critical minerals took center stage. And as a result of the negotiations led by the Government of India, there was a comprehensive discussion which culminated in the formal acknowledgement of the need for reliable, responsible, and sustainable supply chains for critical minerals. And this was further reinforced by the G20 New Delhi Leaders' Declaration in September 2023. We believe this signifies a pivotal moment in a shared and energy-secure approach towards the energy transition. If we look at the deliberations that emerged from the Energy Transitions Ministers' meeting, we see many key insights, but also certain actionable points that emerge. For instance, support for technology diffusion and skill development, beneficiation at source to enhance local value creation, increasing the flow of finance to address lack of capital or human resources, R&D, not just for the virgin mining, but also for efficiency and the circularity of minerals. Also, the need to have environmental and social responsibility to reduce potential negative impacts. And then, of course, leveraging multilateral cooperation. Topping all of this were the high-level principles for collaboration on critical minerals. This is a remarkable achievement. Many times, the consensus language, which may seem generic, but in the negotiations, every single word, every single sentence, of course, underwent meticulous scrutiny. And to be able to come out with language that was so wide-ranging and comprehensive is certainly something to be commended. And if I may take this opportunity to extend my congratulations to the Indian presidency for skillfully navigating these negotiations within the group of 20 countries. India's leadership in these forums has not gone unnoticed, with several countries recognizing our potential to act as a catalyst for a clean energy transition, particularly for the global south, but also ensure that that energy transition is energy secure. I want to also draw attention that in addition to the G20 commitments and the deliberations, there are various other intergovernmental forums where India also plays a pivotal role on this topic. These include the Mineral Security Partnership, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and the Quad Partnership, each focusing on distinct facets of the critical minerals supply chain. While significant strides have been made, there are some essential focus areas where governments need to work together in order to deliver action on the verbal consensus that has been reached. In addition, there have also been deliberations that have happened at the International Energy Agency, where I had the privilege of listening to Secretary Shri V.L. Kantha Rao. There have been also discussions around critical minerals as essential to increasing climate ambition, as was articulated in the final session of the UN Secretary General's Climate Ambition Summit that was held in September and which I had the privilege to moderate. So what are some of these action items that we could be thinking about? One, there is long-term supply and demand forecasting. This is absolutely critical in order to attract the investment decisions into the mining sector. Demand-supply mismatches then result in volatile commodity markets, which is problematic not just for importing countries, it's also problematic for exporting countries as macroeconomic situations undergo severe variance. So one key demand uncertainty is projecting this growth in demand for minerals that will be driven by the economic growth and the energy transition, particularly in the global south. And in order to increase transparency, we need publicly available data on clean energy production, trade, and investments. Second, directing climate finance to the critical minerals R&D and deployment in the global south. We are just a few weeks away from COP28, where, of course, there will be a global stocktake, but also a lot of discussions are envisioned around climate finance. But as we think about the long-term quantified goal around climate finance, let us not forget that it is not just the cost of a solar panel or a wind turbine, but all the things that go into them, or the batteries, for instance, but all the things that go into them that will also require sufficient financing in order to have those diversified and secure supply chains. Related to this is the third agenda item, in our opinion, which is technology co-development. Institutions in technology-rich countries and resource-rich countries should also be collaborating with institutions in the countries such as ours, where there's technology, there's resources, but also where deployment of many of these technologies will occur. If nearly 90% of new electricity demand will come from emerging markets over the next 2 decades, then it is critical that the technologies that service that demand, especially if they have to be clean, are co-developed so that the intellectual property is co-shared for these new technologies. This will also then impact the fourth agenda item of diversifying mineral processing. As Rishabh has pointed out in his presentation, there is a difference between reserves, resources, and then the beneficiation of those minerals. And in order to diversify clean energy value chains, we also need to make sure that large quantities of these minerals that are found in low middle income and low income countries are also exploited in a manner that the host countries are able to participate in increasing value. The final agenda item, which will require both technology collaboration, financial collaboration, but also new rules perhaps in governance, is around deep sea mining. Increased funding into exploring minerals in the seabeds will be something that will become increasingly a contentious sector should there be potential threats to undersea ecosystems, but also concerns around the geographical jurisdiction around these seabeds. CEEW started its work on critical minerals way back in 2014, nearly a decade ago, after conversations with the then National Security Advisor of India. Our first report on critical minerals framework was released in 2016 with support from the Department of Science and Technology, which identified a list of critical non-fuel mineral resources. Earlier this year, as I mentioned, CEEW, in collaboration with the International Energy Agency, with the University of California at Davis, and the World Resources Institute in India, released the official report on the G20 Energy Transition Working Group, which highlights these key vulnerabilities. But if we take the outcomes from the energy transition ministers meeting, if we take the language that comes out from the leaders' declaration, particularly the Green Development Pact under India's presidency, and as we move towards the Brazilian presidency next year, but the several other platforms, including the Mineral Security Partnership or the Quad, I think the outcomes that we have outlined give us a clear agenda to move forward. So with this, I hand it back to Rishabh, and I greatly look forward to listening to Secretary V.L. Kantharao. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arunabha, for the insightful intervention. I'll now hand it over to Shri V.L. Kantharao, Secretary, Ministry of Mines, for his keynote address. So, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. And thank you, Rishabh, for that presentation. And thanks to all the 70-80 participants who have joined today in trying to understand, decode as to what we should do after the consensus we found in G20. So there is an action plan that we should draw up at the end of this seminar today, and we should be able to present it to the minister and the government that this is how we have come up with a roadmap for what kind of action is to be taken after the directions given by the leaders through the declaration at G20. I think this is the basic objective, and I think everything that is to be said about critical minerals has been said in the presentation of Rishabh, and also the speech of Dr. Ghosh, which actually captures the entire gamut of work that is going on around the world, and the work that is being done by CEEW within India. So first of all, thank you very much for the kind of support CEEW has given to the government while most recently while working on the G20 meetings and the declarations, and also over the years. So thank you very much for that. I have come in about 2 months back into this into this department, and the moment they said critical minerals, so I was trying to understand why are they so critical? Because I thought every mineral at some point or the other becomes critical. Suddenly there is some law and order issue in some state, in a certain area, then you find that the sand is not coming out of that area, and you will find that sand is critical. Then you will find that there is some war going on in some country, and a bulk mineral which is either exported there or imported from there suddenly becomes critical. But as Rishabh pointed out, I think these minerals are critical because they are concentrated only in about 10-15 countries. And these minerals are critical because a lot of energy transition goals of the world together has come up with very aggressive goals, and those goals depend on how equitably these minerals are available for each country to do what the country wants to do as per the climate goals. So therefore these are critical, and they will be critical forever, and they are not critical on the basis of certain incidents that may happen. They are not temporarily critical, they are permanently critical. So realizing the importance of the criticality, I think governments have come together either under a banner like G20 or BRICS or MSP or whatever. I mean, you take any of these banners, they are all, they all represent almost the entire world. Like G20 represents some 75% of world's GDP, and MSP represents some 50% of world's GDP. And so the who's who of the world have come together and decided that they need to do something very quick and strong on critical minerals. So that itself is a big victory. Like people 20 years back used to say that the very fact that countries have recognized the importance of carbon emissions or climate change in itself is a big victory. So I think we are at this stage where every country has recognized that critical minerals are important. They need to do something because most of them don't have those minerals. So in the same vein, India has also started working on critical minerals. First of all, before we go around looking for these minerals outside the country, first thing we need to do is to do exploration within the country and see if what is available, what we can exploit within the country. So I'm happy to inform you that there are about 125 projects, exploration projects that we have taken up to look for, search for, dig for critical minerals within the country. That's a big number. And we have already done some exploration over the years. And we have about 20 odd reports which are related to critical minerals, like let's say lithium, graphite, so on and so forth. And these reports are ready for commercial exploitation, that is ready to be auctioned. So I'm glad to inform that in about 10 days time, we will come up with an auction notice for about 20 critical mineral blocks whose reports are ready, and this will be put in the public domain. And we hope that some of them require a bit of deeper exploration, and some of them can be immediately be exploited. So in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, we expect that these blocks will come into production, giving a kind of supply chain confidence to the country. So I'm hoping that whatever the reports are suggesting about the availability of critical minerals in these blocks will come out to be true when actually they start the mining operations. But these 20 blocks may not be enough or those 125 blocks which we are going to do some exploration, and in about a year's time we get those reports, may not be enough to handle the kind of demand that is growing in the country. There is tremendous demand for these minerals like lithium and so on and so forth, where we have very sharp targets, and we have production linked incentive schemes and so on and so forth, where everyone is asking for raw material. So raw material is what we need to supply, and we need to work hard for that. So we are hoping that we will enhance our efforts in exploration and mining. Now, exploration can also be done by a lot of private people. So we are bringing in private sector companies into exploration. We will be coming up with exploration license rules shortly that will encourage people to get into exploration and try to get a reward when that exploration result goes into an auction. So we are working on those rules, and we'll come up with those rules shortly in the public domain, maybe within a month's time. We are also we have just announced about a month back on giving some kind of a cash bonus on finding critical minerals on finding critical minerals during exploration. That is, if we already fund a lot of exploration projects through the resources that we have, like in NMET and so on and so forth. So suppose we give a 100 rupee project to someone to do exploration, and if that company comes up with a good, if that company can explore critical minerals, then we will give a 25 rupee cash bonus, a 25% cash bonus for those who can do exploration of critical minerals. So this is an added incentive where now companies and agencies are showing interest in taking up critical mineral projects. So exploration is important, and it is said that India, as over the last whatever 50-70 years, has not done much on exploration like what other countries have done, or have not spent much. That is going to change, especially with the critical minerals, because we badly need them, and we first need to look within as to where they are available. So those are some of our efforts on exploration. On trying to acquire some of these mineral resources from abroad, we've also created a company called Kabil, and they are making their efforts in reaching out to 2-3 countries. Yesterday, we had a discussion with some of the big public sector undertakings in India, which are trying to get into mining of critical minerals. So it was a very good meeting, and we are happy to note that companies like NTPC have set up a mining subsidiary, and to go especially into, it's called NTPC Mining Limited, to go especially into mining of critical minerals, both in India and abroad. Similarly, Coal India is thinking on those similar lines, and they're planning to come up with a critical mineral arm within the Coal India Limited. So, and we have shared a lot of work that we have done on critical minerals with them, like in 3-4 countries, the kind of initiatives that we have taken, and how we are working with, let's say, countries like Australia, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and all that. So now we have got more and more agencies of Government of India getting involved, and that much of strength is there, and I'm sure we will be able to access a lot of critical minerals abroad. But that's only one part of the story, because the beautiful document that was created in the G20 meetings talks of in very few sentences talks of a lot of work that we need to do. So it talks about ensuring that there is supply diversity, which we are working on, which I have explained as to how we are working on exploration and reaching out to mines abroad and so on and so forth. It also talks about technology, skills, and financing. These are very important aspects. In fact, we are revising our guidelines on science and technology scheme. We have a small scheme where we fund science and technology R&D projects. We are revising those guidelines, and we will be funding startups and R&D organizations which will take up projects specifically to critical minerals, because a lot of processing technology is not there in India. And as Dr. Ghosh said, that we need to co-develop so that we have the intellectual property within us and shared with us. So we will be funding a lot of R&D projects through academia and startups, and also private sector companies. Skills is another area which was identified in the document, which we are working on. And the Sector Skill Council and some of our PSUs are actually looking at the kind of skills that are required, especially in critical mineral processing. So we'll come up with some scheme on that as well. It is currently at a study stage. Another point highlighted in that voluntary principle document is about circularity. So this is something that is highlighted. I mean, almost every meeting I attend internationally, people say that circularity is as important as finding new sources and accessing new sources, and probably faster than finding a mine and trying to process. So we have again through the scheme of our science and technology funding scheme, and also through MOEF, we are working on some of the recycling projects, especially how to fix standards for scrap, standards for recycling, and also how to fix standards for the kind of emissions that may come out, and also the technology, right? So how to fund the technology that is required for recycling. So the broad point is that the government of India, having realized the importance of critical minerals, is willing to spend a lot of resources, a lot of money on this. But we need to find the right kind of people, the right kind of organizations, and encourage them to work on this. It's a slightly long-term solution, but it is a solution that we have to go through. Also, the importance of ESG standards, is another point raised there. We have very good ESG standards within the country, within our legal system, but we need to improve them. We need to study what other countries are doing. We need to look at best practices of other countries and keep improving them time to time. It also gives confidence to the the stakeholders on the other side of the table, uh, like the civil society organizations, the judiciary, and so on and so forth, that ESG is not just a lip service, and ESG is something which we are which we do a lot of due diligence on, and also we try and improve through learning from across the countries and also adopting best practices. So in the end, I want to conclude that this is the time now for action. The time for giving direction was happened last month, and we got the clear direction as to what we are supposed to do, what we are supposed to achieve. I think time has now come to act on each of those guiding principles and show to our country and to the world that we believe in ensuring that there is a supply chain diversity, and there is technology and so on and so forth available for all countries who are in a similar situation like us across the world. So thank you very much, and I hope we will continue to engage in this way, and we'll continue to work together and fulfill these goals in our aim for ensuring critical minerals for energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Rao, for such a comprehensive intervention. You've already highlighted many initiatives that the Government of India is undertaking to action G20, and in many cases going beyond. I would now hand over the session to my colleague, Mr. Karthik Ganesan, Director Research Coordination at CEEW, to moderate the panel discussion on decoding and actioning the G20 consensus. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, Secretary Sir, and also to Arunabha for setting the context for the discussion. I think the presentation and what you've heard pretty much highlights what's underway. We have with us, to all our sort of participants online, 5 experts. We'll introduce them as I call on them to keep it efficient. I'll move first to Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Pramit doesn't really need an introduction, but he currently is associated with the Eurasia Group, and he is their South Asia head. Pramit, the Secretary, of course, spoke about a lot of things that India is doing in, trying to extract resources domestically and possibly also set up, international arms that will go out there and, do what China has been doing very successfully for many years now. But I guess the easy part has been done when it comes to what the G20 leaders have said in terms of the declaration, right? That we want this to be sustainable. Now, the hard part comes, which is delivering on it, right? So how does a country like India, which of course has immense, soft power, but at the end of the day, it's really about translating this soft power that we have to more, tangible policies, right? And to leverage the international forums to get everybody to play by a rule book. And that rule book really doesn't exist. At the end of the day, it is every man for every person for himself. So how do you see this playing out in the international forums that currently exist, whether it's the G20 or any other cabals that have been created? How do we ensure that, there is a rule book that's there that ensures that the interests of the developing South are retained? Because I think there is inordinate burden on the critical minerals to basically address global fault lines. So how do you see this going forward, Pramit?
So in the G20, as you've noted, it's voluntary guidelines, it's about principles. There is no binding capacity of the G20 countries. And really, after the G20 summits are held, a large number of these announcements often fall on the wayside. So what you need to be really doing is looking at those principles and going to other countries. You really need to be not looking at the 20 countries in the G20, but going back and saying to any country, any set of countries, and saying, look, the G20 has cleared this. It's a normative principle. And we would like to work on the basis of this if your government is interested. Keep in mind, this would incorporate countries that are outside the G20. Almost all of the countries that we've discussed about where critical minerals are concentrated, whether it's the Andean mountains in Latin America, whether it's the Congo or the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, none of them are G20 members, other than, let's say, Brazil or South Africa. So therefore, you need to be looking at them diplomatically, perhaps going there and saying that, look, these are G20 principles. They're globally accepted, and we are prepared to work with you. In effect, you create coalitions of the willing around specific elements of those principles. That's really the best you can hope to do in the G20. We are also members of the Mineral Strategic Partnership, the MSP, and that is an organization that's really coming together, but it's implicitly understood the MSP is basically a non-ex-China strategy group. It's a group of countries, as is the Quad, who are wary about allowing, as presently is the case, allowing the mineral supply chains to be dominated by China. So I think for a lot of on the overseas side, a question will be asked is, for example, we now have Chilean companies who are really the world's experts on lithium, even more so than China, looking to expand overseas. But what we need to be able to say in India is, how welcoming are we, not just to the private sector, but to foreign private players? India has a very bad reputation among private mining companies overseas. I have several of the largest ones are my clients and the Eurasia Group clients. And as soon as I say, would you be interested in helping in India mining? They just said, never, never. We will not touch India. That reputation. So India has to really decide what it's going to do about private mining companies, because many of those are the leading specialists in places like lithium. Second, processing, supply chain. More than anything else, what really is less about the mining that everybody is looking for when you're trying to get away from China. It's about China's domination of processing. Is India prepared to play a role in global processing supply chains? Because in many ways, that is the missing link. That is the real strategic area that we need to be looking at.
Great. Thank you, Pramit. So very quickly, you mentioned, of course, that it's going to be tough for us to attract the foreign companies to come in. What is the specific, and since the secretary also mentioned that, we want actionable items, agenda items at the end of the discussion today. So what would you say specifically that India could possibly address when it comes to making this more attractive? He's highlighted, of course, the whole set of financial incentives that exist. But over and above that, what do you think is it that, mining companies, whether they're juniors or others, right, are looking for overseas that would, really attract them towards India?
My guess is that what we did in electronics, for example, India was also considered a place that nobody could do electronics. So we focused effectively on one company, Apple, because it was huge. It was not Chinese. It had a strategic interest in going outside China and developing an alternative supply chain. And it took a number of years of negotiation to eventually persuade Apple that India was a serious player in electronics. And we've now seen, with Apple coming in, shifting about 10% of its iPhone assembly, working with Indian component manufacturers here, we're starting to see other companies. We've seen the Samsung, we just announced Google, and Indian exports or production of electronics, which we are a net importer. We're now a net exporter. We're producing about $50 billion worth of electronics now. And Apple was, in many ways, the test benchmark for everybody else. All of the other companies waited to see. My sense is that was what we will have to do. We would have to go to a foreign mining company, for example, Rio Tinto, which is among the most negative about India, persuade them to come. And then once they were to start mining in India and say, actually, this is now a different India, and there is a positive governmental ecosystem to help us, both at the center and at the state, then we would start to see other private companies come in, or maybe Albemarle from Chile, which is a lithium specialist. But we would need to, in my view, need to be able to showcase at least one or two examples to the rest of the world global mining firms. Because remember, they have other options. There are lots of other countries now offering huge incentives for mining. Right. And that was what I feel that would be my sense of what we would have to do to get them on board.
Great. Thank you, Pramit, for that. I'll move with that question. I'll move to Professor Rajesh Chadda, who's a senior fellow at CEEW. Professor Chadda, taking on from where Pramit has left us, he talked about incentives and he talked about, the mining giants and how, that experience is perhaps lacking in the Indian, sort of mining ecosystem. So what do you see, given that, you've done extensive work on, bringing efficiency into the Indian mining sector, also through policy? what do you see as some of the early interventions that the government could undertake to enable one, build domestic capacity and to allow for technology diffusion to happen in a way, that is beneficial for the Indian ecosystem? But more importantly, by any comments on the incentives, for instance, that the secretary has also said that are up for grabs.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very important discussion that is happening. So I would agree with what Pramit has just said, that we need to create an ecosystem which attracts the foreign investors. And here I think I would like to place one observation from the Fraser Index, that we are not even counted in the Fraser Index that is published by one of the research institutes in Canada. So we need to up our game in various ways.
For our listeners, can you clarify what the Fraser Index is, Professor Chadha?
Fraser Index is about the mining attractiveness index of different mining jurisdictions. So if you Google it, you'll find that 5 years ago, India used to be somewhere in the list, but India is no more there. And there was a discussion on ESG also. One of the second observations, since you have raised this issue, India is not, any of the Indian companies is still not counted in the ICMM, International Council for Metals and Minerals, ESG indexing. So we need to up our game on ESG as well as attracting the foreign companies. I am following up, since you said, on Pramit's observation. And an effective mining policy that enables and promotes private sector investment must account for the security of the tenure of exploration licenses and ease of transferability from exploration to mining concession, which Secretary also talked about, that there would be various incentives. Therefore, irrespective of the method adopted for allocating natural resources, whether it is first come, first serve, or the auctions that we have moved into, there should be enough attraction for the exploration explorer. The holder of an explorer license should get the preferential right to obtain a mining lease for the area explored. And that is what the junior miners keep working for. India, as you know, has an immense potential to mine and beneficiate critical minerals. And India has recently declared its list of critical minerals and has taken some reform on the MMDR amendments in last 1 or 2 years, but particularly the August 2023, when 6 minerals have been omitted from the list of atomic minerals: lithium, beryllium, titanium, niobium, tantalum, and zirconium. The MMDR amendment also introduced a new exploration license, EL, for the deep-seated and critical minerals, which is a very welcome step. This license allows to undertake reconnaissance and prospecting operations for minerals mentioned in the newly introduced 7th schedule to the Act, which includes 29 critical minerals. All very good. One of the concerns regarding the proposed EL is that exploration companies will receive revenue for their work only after a successfully discovered mine is auctioned and operationalized. This may take years or may not even materialize, because I see many of the companies which have won the contracts or won the auctions have not yet started producing.
Right.
Additionally, the exploration company would receive only a share of the auction premium that will be paid to the state. And one of the things that, if I know that there are many speakers, so I think first come, first serve is still there. We have one idea to propose, and we propose that the existing CL composite license regime, we may think of discussions can be held, maybe tweaked to give impetus to the reconnaissance and deep-seated mineral exploration by incorporating specific components of EL. Currently, CL's composite licenses may be granted through an auction if at least a reconnaissance survey has been completed or the mineral potentiality of the block has been identified, it allows concessionaires to undertake both prospecting and mining operations.
Right.
However, some of the recommendations that the composite license should expand its scope to allow reconnaissance, and safeguards should be implemented to ensure that exploration activities occur within a specified time period. So maybe I'm stopping at the idea of some brainstorming on the composite license being given also for reconnaissance, and then onward to the explorer getting the preferential right to mining. I stop here.
Great. Thank you, Professor Chadha, for that. We'll try and come back to some of these points, time permitting, but I think you've placed a whole set of useful points, I think, for the ministry to consider. We have representatives from there. Again, on a related theme, you talked about this, this list of critical minerals, and Rahul, I'd like to sort of turn to you now. Obviously, there is price volatility associated with some of these minerals. They go into existing technologies. At this point in time, what we're hearing is there is a glut when it comes to the manufacturing capacity, right? So presumably, we are in for a period of possibly low prices, notwithstanding some recent rises that we have seen. But do you see that, from your view as Rahul, of course, for those apologies, I didn't introduce him. He's the president and MD of Customized Energy Solutions, but also runs a one-of-a-kind alliance called the India Energy Storage Alliance, which primarily focuses on, of course, energy storage, which is a clear consumer of some of these minerals. So Rahul, do you think the pace of deployment of some of the technologies, in the medium term, could potentially be affected by this, volatility? Or is it still early days, and you feel like, as we've seen in the case of solar, right, that some of these concerns perhaps are not, founded well in the way the market works? Your reflections on that, Rahul?
Sure. Thank you very much, Karthik. Obviously, whenever I think some of these critical mineral price fluctuations happen, that does affect especially sentiments, because especially if you look at advanced batteries, then the critical minerals as a processed materials can account for anywhere from 60 to 70% of the cost of the end product. So it is definitely a critical component. The only thing is sometimes I feel that in media or sometimes even in the policy discussions, we overreact to fluctuations in just maybe one of the components of the battery materials, where maybe the individual components typically account for only 3 to 5% of the cost of the entire battery. So even if there is one particular material where there is a maybe 2x or even 3x price change happens, then it can be within like a 10% price change for it. So it's suddenly not going to happen that because of one constraint, you suddenly have the battery prices going double or triple, because you have seen over last actually 20 years, because of the scale up of the manufacturing, because of improvement on the material side, improvement on the energy density, the manufacturing stabilization, the prices have consistently come down, and some of those trends are expected to continue. Maybe the pace of the price reduction will change, but we need to address this. The other aspect which I feel is that a lot of time the discussion revolves around the spot market prices, but most of the major manufacturers actually have long-term contracts where they are actually protected from these price fluctuations. And as India, particularly, we need to figure out a way, because unfortunately in India right now, we are at a very, very small scale in terms of manufacturing, right? As a ISA, we had set a vision back in 2016 to try to get to at least 20 gigawatt hour manufacturing by 2020. But even now in 2023, we are just starting getting some of these manufacturing plants, and it will be probably 2025 when we have as a country 20 gigawatt hour of manufacturing established. So we are working at a very small scale. Sorry, there was a call coming in. Now we are working at a relatively very small scale as compared to the global peers, where the global industry, which was producing less than maybe 500-600 gigawatt hour of batteries just maybe 5 years back, by 2025, it is expected the global manufacturing capacity will almost scale to 2,500 or 3,000 gigawatt hours. So that's the scale at which it is happening, and we need to figure out some way so that we become a significant player in this, and one way to do it is maybe something like what Ministry of Mines has done with creation of Kabil, where some aggregation is required. But there again, I think the industry and the PSU dialogue needs to improve, because many times when we get questions from either parties, there seems to be the initial teething pain where even the industry is not clear in terms of the volumes required or the price at which they can be competitive when they are starting up manufacturing, and how much commitment they can give upfront. Whereas many of these investments on the mining and even the processing equipment and other thing, that requires 5 year, 7 year kind of at least forward outlook, if not 10-year forward outlook. And that's a pain point I feel, especially next couple of years we will face, where we need to come together as an industry and government. And I appreciate the lot of work which has happened, particularly in last 2 years at Ministry of Mines, where a lot of pain points have been addressed, but there is still scope for improvement, because all of us are learning together.
Great. Thanks, Rahul, for that. I mean, I think the example that you talked about, that long-term view, is very important. I think India has had Indian rare earth limiteds in existence for many years now. And I think the same, attitude of, looking at the current prices to understand, where we stand in the competitiveness ladder and choosing not to invest, I think is one of the reasons why we don't have some of these minerals, produced in India today also, despite the fact that the technical capacity, in these entities existed. So that long-term view, and I guess, which is where again, given that it's good to hear that NTPC and Coal India have, sort of taken to the mining of the resources, but also to the extent that to what extent does being in the public sector also, prevent them from making some of the sort of like the tough choices that private sector might make, because, long-term profitability vis-a-vis, for instance, accountability to taxpayer money when it comes to investment. So I think some of these challenges certainly have to be factored in. Rahul, we'll come back to you for another set of questions in a bit. But moving to Amrita right now. Amrita, this, I guess, brings us to a crucial point. So if private sector is to sort of really come in, right, they need capital that will obviously, cater to their requirements. They don't have the deep pockets that an NTPC has or a Coal India has, right, by virtue of their guaranteed cash flows they have from their operations. And this has been an ask from multiple sectors associated with energy transition, right? So even from renewable energy developers to PLI scheme manufacturers. So of course now extending that same resource pot to mining companies and those in the value chain of critical minerals presents yet more risks, because as Rahul mentioned, there is not that clarity that we are going to be big players. So what will be the basis for them to sort of go out there and seek financing, to cater to their requirements? And, what do you think are the options available, given the work that you've been doing at ICRIER? Amrita is a senior fellow at ICRIER, one of the premier think tanks of India. Amrita, over to you for your response on this.
Actually, before I start, I'll echo some of the things that Rahul said, and also actually Dr. Ghosh, when he made his introductory remarks. So obviously there is a need for long-term vision, and we need to know about the investment needs. Now, if you look at maybe recent reports, etc., they talk about maybe doubling of investment that is needed. And again, our finances are constraints, and it's just not limited to just the CRM discussion. In fact, if you read the ETWG note in whole, you see finance, that is lack of finance, talked about in almost every section. So what do we do? So obviously, I think there is a lot of things that the government is doing correctly. So in terms of being the sort of Sherpa, taking the agenda forward, in terms of providing the quote unquote seed capital, so that there can be crowding in effect of private equity and private capital coming in, because they are then ensured of at least demand from government procurement, and also maybe different, I would say, supply streams that would come in following government's sort of vision. So there is a lot of positives, I would say, but then there are obviously some negatives also that I would want to point out. When we are looking at investment, right? So right now, I see most of the discussion that is revolving around actual dispersals of money. So Secretary Sir talked about PLI, you had different discussions about investment coming in, etc. But there is a very strong role that I see the government to play with respect to risk guarantees as well. Now, as regards mineral technologies. You have many technologies that are known, but there are a lot of unknown technologies as well, which have associated risks. So the government, with respect to its role as probably a risk guarantor or an underwriter, once sorry, real life crept in, but anyways, so the government has a very critical role of being a risk guarantor as well as underwriter to some of the initiatives that are there. Also, this thing about investment in not just physical capital.
Amrita, you can attend to her. You can attend to her. You can sort of. Please. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So investment in not just physical capital, but also with respect to investments in knowledge is what I think is important. So when Secretary Sir talked about investments being made into R&D, etc., so that I think is a very positive step that sort of will bolster more private equity to come in and the like. Thank you.
Right. We'll come back to Amrita. I mean, so. And this, of course, speaks to a range of things that I think government can do better with the money that it's going to put on the table, to try and see how can it leverage, private capital to come in. What is the best way in which we can incentivize, given some of the risks that I think some of the things that Professor Chadda has highlighted. Rahul's also brought in a few points. And for the first round of comments to sort of complete them, I'm going to turn to Kalyan. Kalyan's an associate professor at XLR, right? Kalyan, I think this is coming as an afterthought. I mean, even though it's spelt loud and clear there in terms of resilient and circularity sort of thrown in generous doses. Circularity isn't exactly just, recycling, right? Because, it obviously goes much beyond that. And I think we have to change what we think of when we say circularity. You teach this as part of your courses. And of course, you're closely involved with a lot of the circularity work that's happening on this, Kalyan. So what do you feel are the approaches that India can take to make circularity work better from the get-go when it comes to minerals? Because when we see conventional products, for instance, EPR for plastics, we see that despite the multiple notifications, there's still some way to go before everybody buys into it and the incentives are in place for them to actually act. Anything that you have by way of recommendation to ensure that we see this from the outset itself for critical minerals, Kalyan?
Yeah, thank you so much, Karthik, for that question, for inviting me to this session. You mentioned about that I talk about this. In fact, before this session, I was late to this session because I was talking about circularity in a circular economy in my course, and I will be headed to another session after that. Now, when we talk about circularity, as you correctly mentioned, this is not just about recycling. So when we have to look at circular economy, whether it is in the context of critical minerals or plastics or otherwise, we have to adopt a life cycle approach. Any product, so the laptop in front of you, the pen in front of us, we can broadly categorize this life cycle in 3 stages. Before it reaches us, that is the pre-consumption stage. During the stage it is with us, that is the consumption stage. And once it leaves us, that is the post-consumption stage. Recycling focuses on the post-consumption stage. And a lot of discussions that has happened about recycling is talking only about post-consumption stage. But if we have nothing on, for example, the pre-consumption stage, for example, something like a design. So can I design a product so that it is easily recyclable? Can I design a product so that you have more recycled content? And I think when we talk about this discussion about circular economy, especially in the context of critical minerals and the electronic components and products, I think a lot of that discussion and discourse in India and outside India needs to go in the design stage. Globally, the design of semiconductors and chips is controlled by a select group of companies. And that group is less than 10. And none of them are based in India. So you can have Apple assemble products in India, but the chips they use will not be designed by Apple. So unless India has a table at the design stage, and India along with others as part of mineral security partnerships and others, we will not be able to bring in circularity in this sector, neither in India nor anywhere else in the world. So design has to be a big part of this. So designers, for example, there is a company in Bangalore. We tried reaching out to them for a project we were doing for METI, Ministry of Electronic and Information Technology. Now, this is a German firm involved in the design stage, but they are not party to, or perhaps they are not as much involved in this discussion. So the pre-consumption design stage has to be a part of this. Responsible consumption becomes helpful in making it circularity. So, for example, the consumer stage, what incentives should be given to the consumers? The awareness perhaps needs to go up. But as we have seen in plastics also, merely awareness going up will not help translate into all of this. What makes circularity of electronic products, critical minerals more complex is the complexity in the product category, the manufacturing of the product, the complexity in the number of stakeholders involved, and that's what makes it more I think challenging. The other thing when you talk about circularity, which I think emphasis should be given on. Imagine I was to recover a critical mineral somehow. Will I be able to use it for the same purpose? Will the utility level of that material see a drop or not? Some of the discussion that I have had with recyclers and producers in the electronic sectors say, even if by somehow some technology would be able to recover gallium or germanium, you might not be able to use it with the same purity level in the same chips. So the use of the recycled material might not be for the same initial purpose. And that is again another aspect that we might need to develop. Right now, there is a problem at the technology level also. For most of these critical minerals, the technologies, the recycling does not exist. Now, one of the most ambitious programs in this, which has been taken in the world, is the ProSum project in European Union. European Union came out with this project in 2017-18. They tried to do it. Now they have replaced last year with a Future RAM project, and they have been facing challenges. Getting data from the producers, getting data from the recyclers at a product level, at a societal level. And this is when the informal sector is not prevalent in the European Union. In India, when you add on the complexity of the informal sector, what data can a regulator and a CPCB or any Ministry of Mines have when the data resides with some designers elsewhere in the world, some producers around scattered around the world? And in the absence of that data, that credible data, then it becomes very difficult to enforce some of these. So if you are looking for any short-term solutions, and as Secretary Rao correctly pointed out, this is a big point of discussion across countries of the world and across companies of the world. Beyond when you talk about what perhaps solutions can work, I think one good thing that has perhaps happened in India is if you look into the more recent disclosures in the BRSR that SEBI has brought out. Now, at least 5 or 6 of disclosures explicitly talk about the amount of material recycled by the companies. Now, there are no standards as such, there are no targets as such. These are only at a disclosure level. But it's a good start. And that disclosure level, as a part of a regulatory mechanisms, can tomorrow kick in to become a market-based mechanism, where there can be a ranking of companies that are perhaps having a circular economy in there. And that ranking can act as a market-based mechanism to nudge companies towards that. So regulations and policies needs to be there. In the absence of that, that initial push will not come. But beyond that push, these market mechanisms needs to kick in. Market mechanisms like preferential treatment for, so government is a bulk buyer, government gives preferential treatment to goods that are made from recycled content. Or, for example, reduce preferential GST treatment on recycled input components or recycled final components. Right now, if I'm a company, why should I go for a recycled content? Does the government give me any preferential treatment? Because money is the one that you can communicate with the companies. And right now, that perhaps is not there. What incentives work for perhaps a consumer level? So these are some broad thoughts I have, I think, on these topics. And over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Kalyan. I think very useful points that you make. And I think, Rahul, I want to come to you with a related point that Kalyan has made with regard to who is working on the tech for instance, the way these minerals are used. And that then brings us to what is the ecosystem in India, whether it's for R&D or more importantly, even for populating these entities that will come up in any part of the value chain. So as you are seeing entities trying to put up whether it's a battery manufacturing facility or possibly even a recycling facility and a recovery facility, what do you see from your discussions with the industry partners when it comes to the talent pool that's available in India, and what is being done to address that lack of talent, if there is one, Rahul?
Sure. So again, this is a very important aspect. Actually, when we floated the India Battery Manufacturing and Supply Chain Council 2 years back, we were actually not sure exactly how many companies are interested. Do we need to target international companies and bring them to India? But one thing, as we started working on this and started involving various stakeholders, to my pleasant surprise, there are actually a lot more chemical processing companies in India who have some capabilities in the value chain which can play a key role. And suddenly within 2 years, we have seen the number of companies who are getting involved with the critical mineral processing for especially the advanced battery or e-mobility sector has almost increased 3 times. At least that's the number of companies we are interacting. Probably there are more companies who are not yet involved with ISA or our activities. So overall, I'm actually much more optimistic now as compared to before. But it's just that there is going to be a lot of pain point, because some of the processing, maybe the technologies, we need to figure out technology partners for going to the purity level which are required for some of these industries, such as battery industries, which is one of the highest grade purity which is required, because it is not about just providing some material. What we are seeing internationally is most of the top companies, they are actually controlling the complete value chain in terms of their controlling, deciding which mine from which the material is coming, what grade material is coming, where it is getting processed, what material is, what processing technology is being used, and then how that end product is also getting recycled. So I think right now in India, we are in an early stage of this. But that's where we have actually one more opportunity, is that we don't need to keep on thinking about this entire thing just around Indian domestic consumption. I think that is a big thing. It will be in 10 years a big component. But right now, one of the early thing what we can do it is look at actually the Indian supply chain industry as a part of a global mix. Because if we do that, then the opportunity to scale up the supply chain will be at least 2x, if not 4x for India. Because right now, globally, as I said earlier, from around 1,000 gigawatt hour of manufacturing in early 2022, we are looking at having global capacity of almost 5,000 gigawatt hour. So by 2030 or 2032. So even if China controls 80% of the current processing industry, there is additional 3,000 gigawatt hour new capacity which is going to get created. And even if China continues to process half of that or more, I think India can target maybe 15-20% of that global capacity. And that would be almost 3 times bigger than the domestic requirement. And if we start paying attention to that, and that's where I think government role is also going to be critical, where we cannot just stop with being with the MSP and some of these partnerships, because when most of the countries, like say US, the IRA rules and regulations, they require certain additional clarity in terms of maybe a bilateral agreement between India and US, which will enable Indian companies to be part of this. On the talent side, I think India has a lot of underground background courses in either mining or materials or other things. So I think in terms of the talent pool, there are enough undergraduates getting trained, but there are not enough opportunities for them to get a industry grade practical experience right now in India. And that's where, again, as IESA, we are trying to work through the US-India joint energy storage partnership, as well as with government of Western Australia, on try to create some kind of a exchange programs or something where we can fast track this process, so that it's not happening where suddenly the industry starts developing, and then what happened in IT industry, where every company had to develop their own complete training and retraining programs. I don't think the energy sector and mining sector can afford that, I think. So there is a need for doing industry across skilling and skill development, and through IESA Academy we are trying to do our bit, but I think the challenge is much bigger, and we need to bring in all the interested parties together and fast track it. Because one thing I think we need to be concerned about is the timeline in which this scale up is happening, right? We are at that inflection point. So we cannot keep on thinking about linear in terms of doubling in 5 year kind of a thing. We need to be looking at going from maybe few thousand to maybe going to 20, 30, 40,000 skilled manpower within next 5 year kind of a scale. So we need to figure out scalable thing. We cannot keep on doing one-off things and expect we'll solve this problem.
Sure. Thanks, Rahul. Professor Chadha, that brings me to a point that Rahul has raised with regard to, technology. I think I kind of posed this to you in the first round, but maybe we didn't get around to looking at it. When it comes to technology diffusion, right? Specifically, let's say, in mining, from what you've perhaps seen, while there are these partnerships that exist, in theory, to what extent do you feel that, it is conducive for, India to actually sort of obtain some of the technologies that are needed for the mining? And do you feel that the international regime that currently exists, and we already know, for instance, the processing of titanium, right? Many of those are closely kept. To what extent do you think some of those will pose hurdles to India's aspirations in various parts of the value chain? And do you see any specific steps that the government of India needs to take, either by way of the partnerships that it's currently part of, or maybe some new mechanisms that need to be put together to address this particular barrier, Professor Chadha?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. I think it is in the continuation of what is under discussion. I think as I would like to raise one point that we have recently celebrated the lithium find, and going by next 5 years, let's say we start extracting lithium. What do we do with it if we are not ready with downstream and processing? So I will begin with that question mark first, that celebration should be with caution. And what do we do with it? Do we send it to China for processing, or are we getting battle ready to do the needful? So this is, with this in brief one observation, I think there is a critical gap in the usage of information and operational technologies in the mining sector in India, leading to suboptimality and inefficiencies across the mining value chain, from exploration through mine design, operation, maintenance, mining assets, and environmental measures. India needs mining equipment, information, and operational technology in all its aspects, and the world-class professional and technical services to improve the efficiency and productivity of the mineral extraction and beneficiation process. Upgrading, as was mentioned, the skills of human resources is urgently required. While providing employment is essential, introducing computerization, automation, and adopting state-of-the-art technology is equally important to make India a globally competitive mining country. Now, application of technologies are important, because we need to move from resource estimation, that's reconnaissance, mine design, engineering, production, operation, etc. Hence, multiple facets and aspects are required to be, we need to pay serious attention as early as is possible. The Indian mining industry is experiencing a dramatic change and presents an immeasurable opportunity. Here, I would like to bring in learning from the best practices. And in Australia, the mining boom over the past decade and a half has led to the development of a sophisticated Australian mining equipment, technology, and services, as we call METS, which operates in Australia and has a significant presence in overseas markets. So, METS sector in Australia, which has contributed hugely to the successful Australian mining industry, in fact, needs to be brought up and brought out with serious engagement of private players and the government with the Australian METS sector, which they will be probably happy to do. And lastly, the Australia and India have a partnership of shared mutual strategic and economic priorities. And the recently signed Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade, I'm just giving one example, not saying strict to Australia, will support further growth and investment in Australia's world-leading minerals resources sectors, learning from them, and learning from international best practices under the G20 countries would be also equally important. I'll stop there.
Right. Thanks, Professor Chadha. I think this brings us to this important point of, while all of this needs to happen in the Indian ecosystem, there has to be, Amrita, coming to you, right? There is, of course, a sense that for the reasons that Pramit mentioned, right, and for the reasons that I think Professor Chadha also mentioned earlier, ESG is something that, again, the burden of ESG suddenly come on to critical minerals. I mean, it's an overhang for industry as it stands today, because certainly, environmental compliance is important in the way we do, current, business as usual manufacturing. But specifically when it comes to mining, right, it seems like, the standards are being set outside the country when it comes to what is appropriate, what is not. And that in turn can then, turn the tide on who sees India as investment grade because, we're compliant or not compliant with the standard that's being set outside. And as much as, there is this dichotomy of, whether ESG is, sort of just, check the box exercises or not. What do you feel are the approaches that India should be taking in order to sort of ensure that it's making the right signals overseas to ensure that the investment finds its way here? Right? Clearly, a lot of investors, I think I was given an example right now of, I think, BlackRock which I think is a question that's actually come from somebody in the audience, is reluctant to invest in in mining on account of low valuation multiples and high cost of capital, and also because of the ESG strictures. So again, it should not be something that turns investors away as well. So is there a sweet spot that you think is possible given the way India will sort of have to look at it? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I lost my rhythm during the first question,
No,
so
no,
I'll do
please, absolutely.
better this time.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So basically, actually, thank you for the question. If I could just respond, maybe I'm sort of on the fence with regard to this, because as regards ESG, you also talked about it. There is a lot of things that are happening, and one hears about it. There are a lot of voluntary principles. The SEBI also has guidelines about companies reporting their sort of what they call business responsibility reportings, etc. So a lot of things are happening, but then it is not amounting to a lot on the ground. In fact, Chadha sir, when he was talking about, he said that none of the companies are mining companies are ICMM, I think, ESG compliant. That is the point. But then again, you hear about IBM coming up with star rating that many mining companies are compliant with. So what does it all amount to at the end is something. Now, obviously, we could use investment as a lure because you have these new form of funding coming in as the ESG funds, and that could be the lure for going ahead with ESG rating. But then again, the storyline, I would say, is pretty unclear. So if there is lack of clarity on what, after being ESG compliant or having these sort of reporting standards maintained, what it would mean in terms of gains that the company makes, we would not have a very strong sort of motivating force that goes ahead. So I think my first point would be that if we can get case studies, or at least a compilation of case studies that look at companies that have gone ahead and done the needful, and what were the gains that they made. Maybe it could be an infusion of funds, maybe it could be better, I would say, worker happiness that led to higher labor productivity. I don't know. So we need, I think, a scientific way and a collection of these sort of case studies so that you have a empirical basis of arguing ahead. The second thing, um, and this is, I think, a more recent phenomena, is that some countries, so specifically I'm talking about Germany or even EU as a whole, they have taken, rather than a voluntary route, they have taken a mandate route. So you have the Supply Chains Act and you have other acts that are talking about how ESG risks could be sort of managed or mitigated. We have not made it a mandate as such, but I wonder if that is the way in which, so if we as a country, we as a nation feel very strongly about it, and not just as an investment route at all, but if we feel very strongly about different norms being preserved, environment quality, social norms, etc., that could be the route that we could take as well. And there are examples that are there out there.
Right. Thank you, Amrita, for that. Pramit, just sort of coming to you for trying to stitch together some of these concerns that have been raised, right? So there is, of course, ESG is one part of it, and then there's, of course, international, rules that you have to abide by. Countries might sort of, today it looks like it's favorable, right? There's a China +1, so Indian companies presumably will have some benefit when it comes to the way American companies looking to source what is needed. But overall, do you feel that there is a possibility that trying to abide by the rules of trade will actually work in favor of the private sector, or do you feel that some of it may end up being restrictive and as a result end up sort of causing more challenges to the way we source our minerals? Because all said and done, China is the elephant in the room. And if countries were to sort of try and alienate it, it just, I think, throws a lot more spanner in the works. So what is your sense in terms of how we need to navigate international trade rules vis-a-vis, I think, what specific countries' objectives are in achieving, security for themselves?
So the rules come at different levels, right? So the WTO and the standard international trade agreements don't actually have too many restrictions. They're basically tariffs. And tariffs are basically local, and most globally, most minerals come at very low tariffs. So that's not I don't think that's a big issue. We need to be able, however, to guarantee that tariffs don't rise. In other words, if you don't bind them in agreements, what you end up having is countries either really, I think the bigger issue for India will be import restrictions. So if we are importing a certain mineral from a certain country, the concern would be we need to guarantee that that country doesn't suddenly say, we have a problem, we are not going to allow those minerals to leave our country. Or vice versa, the same with India, if we were to start exporting minerals. So that's what we need to be building into our FTA structure. So, for example, the African Common Free Trade Agreement that we have now begun negotiating with, putting in something on that guarantee inside of that to make sure that if we begin to import minerals on a large scale, for example, cobalt, almost all of it comes from Africa. We have a guarantee that there will not be those type of restrictions imposed, at least some sort of a barrier to make it a little bit more difficult for that. Processing, we have to basically do it ourselves. Somebody has to do the processing. Otherwise, it will be 100% dependency on China. As Professor Chadda correctly said, we can dig out all the lithium we want in the world out of our mountains, and then we have to send them to China to process because nobody else does it. So therefore, you end up basically ensuring that your supply chain becomes completely China dependent. Then there's a whole set of other things. So the MSP, the Mineral Strategic Partnership, which has just begun. What we're going to be seeing, we're starting to see already in electronics, we're starting to see that in data, is a fragmentation of the global trading system, where countries basically, ex-China in particular, you're seeing a group of countries saying, we don't trust the Chinese. We have strategic reasons to stay out of that. So we will build, in effect, a de facto supply chain or a trade agreement that is built around, as much as possible, reduce our dependency on China. It's already happening in semiconductor chips, for example, where globally governments are not basing their semiconductor chip policy on any commercial thing. They're only looking at ensuring against supply chain disruptions, hence the huge subsidies that are being generated. That's something similar is going to start developing, initially with just a handful of critical minerals, but slowly will begin to spread. But as long as China maintains dominance of processing, it will be impossible to reduce your dependence on China, except for a handful of minerals, and that's something that has to be changed. Graphite, for example, which is almost barely not seen as critical minerals by a lot of governments, or not even seen as a rare earth. It's not rare at all. Is a Chinese story, and again, these are dependencies that are going to continue. So, crafting that as an integrated policy of trade, building it into the organizations like the Quad, working the G20, as I said, is just the beginning of that process. So you will have a group of countries that may be specific, that you may trust. And when we use the word trusted geographies now in data policy in India, those specific countries that we are allowed to allow cross-border data flow, largely the Quad plus a few others. We're going to have a similar policy eventually on certain critical minerals, especially as Indian demand takes off. We're already, you can see, ensuring that Chinese EV companies are not allowed into the country or putting huge restrictions on them. Automatically, then that means your critical mineral policy will start to follow. Your battery policy will have to start to follow similar decisions as the Chinese start to react.
Right.
We're just on the beginning, the cusp of that, because China hasn't really retaliated yet, but that will inevitably come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're virtually out of time. And I think, I just want to sort of maybe pose the question to Kalyan, maybe just for his reflection. But, Kalyan, I think you've said pretty much, the meat of what, encapsulates the idea of circularity there. But given what we've heard from Pramit here and from multiple others, right, asking for design changes and for things to be sort of made more, sustainable, right, in the use and, as you said, in the production, requires, fundamental change in the way we're thinking. As I said, we can't impose this entirely only on the products that contain critical minerals. It has to be more far-reaching. So from your experience, very quickly, where do you think India should start when it comes to the way we're looking at re-engineering products, especially the ones that are likely to contain some of these minerals?
Yeah. Thank you, Karthik, for that question. But before I think I do that, I think the more I'm hearing about China, the more I'm convinced that the blurring of boundaries between what are critical minerals and what are strategic minerals has already happened. Because technically, strategic minerals are different from critical minerals. But the more we talk about a country or any country where the national security or other things comes in, so, and that increasingly we will find going forward, we will increasingly find critical minerals being superseded by the term perhaps strategic minerals. Because strategic is a larger term that encapsulates critical minerals.
Sure.
One thing that I would perhaps just resonate what Rahul had mentioned, even with secularity and others. There's a need for importance of harmonization of Indian standards with global standards. Because tomorrow, if you want Apple to come and make in India, Apple will not make only for India with only for Indian standards. Unless Indian standards, whether it is for product design, whether it is for recycling, whether product part, if those standards are outdated or very different from the global standards, then it's very difficult for us to attract any global companies to come and set shop in India. I think the harmonization of standards, whether it is for critical minerals, whether it's, for example, the definition of critical minerals. Right now, there is no one common global definition of critical minerals because every country defines criticality differently. In the Indian context, for example, we might have to consider that in the recycling part, a lot of informal sector people are involved. There's a lot of environmental and social externalities in the recycling in the Indian context because recycling in India does not happen through machines or through capex. That is how it might happen in others, but here it's a labor-intensive process. So unless we have some universal standards and allow for region-specific variations, it will be very difficult for us to tell to Samsung because Samsung might say, well, this mineral is critical here, it is not critical there. And I have a global production network. How do I factor that in my company discussion right now? So that I think is very important. One thing that India perhaps can do, India can look at what perhaps South Korea, China, and what EU has done recently. They have set in their legislation some standards, targets for recycling. South Korea has a target, for example, of 20% by certain year.
Sure.
EU has said that every EU country needs to have 15% of total recycling capacity. And here we have to be very realistic. If you look into some of the more recent steps of some other part, we talk about achieving 80% recycling in 2 years. That's not going to happen. And such a target is very unrealistic for the producers. Such a target is very unrealistic for the country as such. So again, those sort of targets, and if we can have a regulatory perhaps step for that, I think that we can perhaps do. So I think in a nutshell, because of paucity of time, I'll restrict it there.
Thank you so much, Kalyan. Rahul, I know you have a point to make, but we really are over time. We're holding the secretary and his team behind. But let me just say this. I mean, I think the secretary started off by saying that he wants tangible action points. And I'm sure some of this is given food for thought. But what we will certainly do is, I think there are a range of questions that we couldn't sort of do justice to. I thank, of course, all the participants over here. But Dr. Veena will, of course, formally offer thanks to close this session. But we will be collating all of these questions. We will send it across to some of our experts who are on the panel here, try and solicit responses and come back to the ministry, with the tangible action points and takeaways from today's session. Of course, this document will also be made public eventually in some way, right? And all of the members here are collaborators in some way. But thank you to everyone for taking the time to stay through. I'll now call on Dr. Veena from the Ministry of Mines Director to formally close the session. Dr. Veena, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Loud and clear, yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon. We all agree that India's G20 presidency signified a pivotal moment in its global leadership, and with its diverse economy and significant technological advancement, we have brought a unique perspective and also capability to the global stage through our presidency in G20. And through ETWG working group, we could successfully get the attention of the global G20 countries to deliberate on critical minerals and get a paragraph included in the leadership declaration. And also the leadership declaration has noted the high level principles which we have drafted. And I would like to thank CEEW for all their support during the G20 deliberations, as well as post G20 for organizing these workshops and reaching out to a larger audience. Subsequent to the G20, what are the policy measures the government of India, Ministry of Mine has taken, has been detailed, explained in detail by Secretary Mines. And in addition to what is done in the domestic front, I also would like to inform the gathering today that we are taking all our bilateral cooperation with various countries. Also, these principles, which is agreed upon by the G20 countries, is a part of our discussions, and we are part of many of the multilateral platforms like MSP, and we are also deliberating in detail about other clubs which is proposed by European Union and other countries also. So the multilateral and bilateral engagement on the critical mineral sector also is now more active post G20. So that being said, today's discussion has really pinpointed certain points which we need to concentrate as a ministry. And first of all, the Arnaba has stressed the need to have a very data-driven approach towards all our activities, and the need for having a forecast on demand and supply to address the price volatility in the critical mineral sector also is being stressed upon by Rahul. Amrita has given us a kind of overview about the need for skilling of the skilling of our younger generation. I think it was by Rahul. And how best we can take advantage of the various bilateral agreements and the friendly relation with countries like Australia to take forward the skilling of our mining engineers, which we have noted. And Dr. Chadda has given food for thought on the changes which is required on the composite license, the current composite license provisions. Definitely, we can deliberate further on that. I think if Secretary Sir agrees, we'll have further meetings and we can have deliberations on that. We all agree that we need to create an ecosystem for attracting foreign investment, foreign investors and the junior mining companies. We have taken baby steps towards that. We have made some policy changes towards that, and we will be taking it forward also. And the other points in a nutshell which has come out during the discussion are like the life principle on circularity. I'm thankful to Professor Kalyan for giving us overview about the circularity issue, and also the thought process that from the design stage itself, we need to think about circularity. It's quite interesting. We need to work on that. And ESG compliance, as Secretary Sir has rightly mentioned, our country in the mineral sector, we have enough provision to comply with the ESG standards. And what is that we are going to get, our companies are going to get by complying with the ESG standards, in addition to all those goodwill and all, maybe access to the markets. Many, as we all know, the European Union has started making provisions. So maybe the access to the Western market will become, ESG standard will become a first step for getting the access to the Western market. And then the big question is about the technology transfer. As we all know that most of the countries keep the technology very close to their heart and nobody is ready to share. That is an area which it's a tough nut to crack, I should say. So we have noted down all the points which has emerged from the discussions today. I would like to thank Secretary Sir for his keynote speech, Arnaba for his introduction and special address, all the panelists, and special thanks to Karthik and Rishabh for organizing this program. I also thank all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Veena. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying with us for a little over the 90 minutes that we had planned. This is obviously a very important discussion. We hope to sort of continue to stay in touch and publish more with all of our collaborators who are on this call. Thank you, Dr. Veena. Thank you, Secretary Sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.